welcome back to the Sheldon Show. So today my guest is a fellow YouTuber, Tricia Barker, and today's conversation is going to focus on, we're going to basically discuss sexual assault, what it is like to be a rape victim or survivor, and ways that if you have suffered from something like that, perhaps how you can overcome or maybe deal with at least the fact that if you were a victim of sexual assault or anything along those lines. So before we get into it, I'll have Tricia introduce herself and then we'll take it from there.
Well, hi, I'm Tricia Barker, and normally I talk about spiritual topics, but I've written a book that combines spiritual topics and confronts rape culture because I think it's an important topic today, and so many people have been assaulted or harassed, and there's so much conversation around this, so I think that more conversation is important, and certainly I didn't do enough healing work early on, so I always want to encourage people to do that healing work early in their journey.
Okay. And as you said, this is something that's really difficult to talk about. Personally, for me, I've only told a couple people that I was a victim of child molestation. So even being a victim, it's really difficult for me to even have a conversation about it because it's like I'm always trying to figure out what are the right words for me to say, or because I understand hearing people talk about it and how I felt. A lot of times I didn't feel like they quite could appreciate what someone goes through. So to start off, how would you define rape culture? Really, what is rape culture? Because we threw that word out there.
Right, and first, before I do, I wanted to say that I totally understand where you're coming from about, the nervousness or the reluctance to talk about these issues, and it took me a long time, and after encountering so many students who've been in similar situations, and even writing this book, I had to do like breath work and Tai Chi and chakra work to keep, this trauma kind of moving through me and healing. And rape culture, I think, can be defined pretty well in the country where I was raped, which is South Korea. And there are similarities to South Korea and the United States. But when I was raped, I called my Korean girlfriend and I said, hey, I've been raped. And she's like, this is also common. I said, do we go to the police? And she said, don't even bother, you're a Westerner, you were out drinking. And I was like, but I wasn't drunk, I don't think that should matter. I should at least make a report that this happened, even if they don't take me seriously. And she said, they don't take Korean women that seriously. There's so few instances that go to trial. Why, as a Westerner, would you even bother being made fun of? They call Westerners names because we're more extroverted and we go over there and live a little differently. And women's voices were just not appreciated. Even in her culture, she was divorced and she did not get full custody of her kids, even though her husband was abusive. Like, there's just so much power that the men had legally that the women didn't. And so the reactions to my rape from, Korean people and American teachers, people were uncomfortable. They didn't know how to comfort me. Yeah. And I would have healed so much faster if they would have reached out and gone, oh my God, I can't believe you went through that. So that's part of rape culture, is just this, let's don't even talk about it. And the beginning with blaming the victim. So the very first questions that were asked was not, who is he? It was, were you drinking? What were you wearing? All these things, instead of, who is he? And he came into your apartment while you were asleep and did this. I mean, this is a violent crime that should have been looked into.
I think a lot of people are hesitant to say anything because, as we said, how do you even bring up the topic of what do you tell someone? I think it's like that moment when someone dies, you're struggling for words to tell their loved one or whatever the case is, because just words, you're at lost for words, and then you don't want to say that dumb thing. So that's why I think a lot of people don't say anything. And I think in the United States, and certainly in Trinidad and Tobago as well, we are only really just making progress too in terms of how we view a woman's voice when something like that is to happen. Especially in a case where if it was a male, like in my case, it's just, and I was 10, 12 years old when this was going on, and it happened repeatedly. But my thing was, well, I was already conscious of the fact that I'm a guy. Who's gonna listen to me? Are they gonna make fun of me and tease me like I'm a girl? I mean, there was all those things that were going through my mind. Who's gonna listen to me? So my thing to you is, how did you at first, my question is, how did you at first deal with the trauma of it all when it happened?
I didn't. I was 24, and I thought I was young and tough. I realized something major had happened to me, but I wanted to put it behind me. So I thought as soon as I left Korea, I'd be fine. You know, I ended up in Honolulu, and it was there that I met this, it's kind of just an anecdote, but I met this surfer, and I thought he was picking me up, you know, like in a flirtatious way, but he stopped after talking to me, and he was like, you know, I was kind of hitting on you, but I sense this deep sadness in you, and I just want to give you a hug and tell you to come back to Hawaii at another time when you feel better. And I was like, God, it's evident. You know, like, here I am, and it's, you know, I'm walking around in this wound.
And it's showing.
Yeah, it's showing, and that was my first thought. And then I went to hear some women speak at a college, and one of them had been raped when she was in the Peace Corps, and others, you know, while in college, and I saw just how traumatized they were, and I was like, God, if they're that traumatized, then I must be too. And, you know, it took several years. Like, I tried going to the Rape Crisis Center, and I got kind of angry when I was there, because I saw children, you know, like, and that really bugged me. You know, I was an adult woman, and so it was one thing to process that, but seeing children go through that just, like, tore my heart into pieces. So I went into my angry phase, and I took, you know, all kind of self-defense courses, and I'm not sure that I took the right path. I think self-defense courses are good, but I should have combined that with therapy really early and walked through that pain, because the sooner you walk through that pain with others caring about you, the better it really is. And
what would you suggest now for someone who's probably watching or knows someone who perhaps recently lived it, or, you know, it's been a while but they still haven't dealt with it?
It's never too late to go to the Rape Crisis Center. So certainly, you know, it's a counselor who is skilled in trauma, and dealing with trauma is important. The Rape Crisis Center offers you a community, so that's a great resource. And I'm a firm believer in energetic work, whether that's yoga or Tai Chi, but when I was writing about rape, I felt like right in the pit of my stomach, just like, I felt like I was going to faint, actually, as I was writing about it, and I felt like all this energy just getting stuck there, and I started using different modalities to get this energy moving and really kind of release it, because I think we store up fear and it just isn't fully released, and that's like part of the process, is just releasing more and more. And especially as a kid, you know, I mean, I've worked with shamans, I've worked with counselors, I mean, I'm really experimental, and I've done a lot of different things, and I can't pinpoint, you know, which one works the most, but there is a lot of information about PTSD out there, and complex PTSD.
Why do you think a lot of people still don't? Because you look at research, and a lot of people are still hesitant to come forward and say, women, especially men, especially in a society where you're supposed to be masculine and tough and all that type of stuff. How could that happen to you as a man? Why do you think a lot of people are still hesitant to step forward and say that they were?
They're judged, and it's terrible. Like in junior high, I taught at a junior high level, and I had a boy in my class who fell apart one day, and teachers were making fun of him for the concert t-shirts that he wore, his behavior, and I pulled him aside and I said, what's going on? And he told me that his child molester was getting out of prison that day and coming back to their town, and he was falling apart. And I just, you know, I kept him after class, and I knew one other girl in that junior high who was his girlfriend who had been raped, and we talked about this openly, and I talked about how to feel okay in this world, how to take care of himself, and I told him, you know, he's a more empathetic person because of what he went through. He understands what other people have gone through, and you know, that moment, and also sex ed in public schools was kind of a joke, because I was like, you're not talking to these kids who, his child molester is getting out of prison, that day, she was raped a month ago. You know, these are kids that need work in those areas,
Yeah.
you know, and if they're sexually active, that's the least of your worries.
Yeah.
I mean, it really is. And I know that it sounds terrible to say
Yeah,
that,
no,
you know,
yeah.
but I mean, yeah, you want all kids to take care of themselves
Yeah.
emotionally and, you know, wait to have sex
Yeah,
and all that, but
yeah.
to give an abstinence-only talk to kids who are riddled with trauma. 1 in 5 of my kids were abused in some way in this junior high. And I actually took them into the classroom and we had a discussion about safe sex practices, but I still stressed, you know, like, you're too young, you know,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
it's like,
yeah.
but don't have kids, you know, at 15, please, don't do it. And they really appreciated it, actually. They were like, this is what we needed to hear. And I was like, I know, but I was a rebel, you know,
Yeah.
but I think my experiences helped me see them and not judge them. So I think, one, people are afraid of being judged, and that goes back to the rape culture. Women are judged, you know, like immediately we start looking at, well, look at the way she dresses, look at the way she...
Did you
know,
drink too much?
Yes.
Did you do anything that was suggestive? Or,
Yeah, and it's... Yeah, and that's the hard part, is being judged, reliving it. So there's a book called Lucky by Alice Sebold, and she has the perfect rape case. She was a virgin, she was wearing baggy clothes, she was walking home at night, she didn't know the guy, she was attacked in the quad. He was not a college student, you know, he was a criminal, and even then, it was so hard to get a conviction. So like when you have the perfect case scenario, you know, where everything is in your favor, it's very difficult. And I think that's what's missing in the conversation when we talk about women who have lied, you know, about rape. Well, people have lied about murder, people have lied about theft, and we don't go, oh, let's not worry about murder. You know, like people lie about things, but the crime is real. And that's what needs to be looked at and addressed. And then I think younger people are just ashamed, and maybe like me, they want to think that they're tough
enough and
they
strong
can just
enough.
get through it. And, you know, but it can become cumulative. So say you suffer rape, but then you're harassed here, and then at some point, you know, PTSD shows up much later. And you're like 10 years later, you're like, wow, I'm really traumatized.
I feel like there's a role here for men to play. What do you think is the role that men, fathers, business leaders, especially with the Me Too movement and all that going on, it's not just a woman's responsibility to say so. I think there's a strong role for men. Men are basically the ones who mostly, you know, what do you see the role for men to play from the home to the corporate boardroom?
I think a lot of men and fathers care, they just don't know how to begin the conversation. And it's okay if you stumble a little. Like, I think women would be like so grateful if you just brought it up and listened, and then listened to what they say, you know, might help. But Jackson Katz talks about the bystander approach, and that's what was missing, I think, in the 90s when I went through this, is there was no accountability. You know, there was no calling other men out on sexist behavior like there should be, perhaps. And there is sometimes, I'm not saying that all men don't, but, you know, like certainly there are men who have stepped in when they see one of their friends as being maybe on borderline stalker, you know, and say, hey man, you gotta leave this girl alone, like, you know, this is crazy. And so they do step in at times, but I think there just needs to be more social implications, you know, and repercussions for
consequences
it.
for your actions.
Consequences, and when that happens, then there's more of a conversation around it. But, you know, there are men who are going to be married to women who are trauma survivors and date women who are trauma survivors. And I know this is a little moment, but after I came back to the States, this guy who I was dating came up and hugged me from behind, and it freaked me out. You know, and he just looked at me and didn't want to have that conversation. Like, I could tell he processed what I was going through. But I would say just go ahead and have that conversation, because listening to someone and being empathetic is one of the best things you can do, because it just allows them to feel validated and move on a little.
So before we started recording, you said that it takes a community to heal. Explain what you mean by that.
Well, the Rape Crisis Center is one community, but in the States, I think we're we're just so individualistic, and
Yeah.
we're like, I'm going to carry this wound and I'm fine, and then maybe I'll talk about it later. But as I started telling my story, or just showing up in the classroom and maybe teaching a poem that mentioned something about rape, and then students would talk to me, I realized that I'm somewhat of a wounded healer. You know, I'm someone who can reach out to these students and understand them, and then they share the work that they've written, perhaps in a creative writing class about something traumatic, and we all hold a space for them to begin healing. And community, whether it's churches,
Yeah.
whether it's a counseling group, whether it's a creative writing class, whether it's just a class, I think you hold the burden of someone else. You're not going to take away their pain completely, but you do just help them feel validated, and that's so important. And I think, you know, when I see students heal a little bit quicker than me, I think, okay, this is why I'm talking.
This is why I'm talking.
Yeah, like you did the right things. You went to the Rape Crisis Center. You dealt with this early, and you're walking through it. And though it's painful, you're going to do it in these couple of years and not have this flashback 10 years later and start having to deal with it.
So one of the things that I did, although I kept quiet for a really long time, was, since I'm a believer, right, I would pray a lot that, I don't know, not that it would go away, but that somehow I would be whole again. What role did spirituality play for you in that process?
That's a really, really good question. On my channel, I talk about my near-death experience and how when I went out of form and I went to the light, none of the pain I took with me. So nothing anyone had done to me was anything I took with me. And so I know it's not the reality, even though it seems like the reality here. It seems like nothing is more important, you know, than this trauma we're walking through or these horrible things. But love is really what matters, and so that's kind of what I meant about community too. The love I give to students is worth 1,000,000 times more than the pain that was done to me. And so like staying in that place of love is really the great healer, and also just meditating on that enormous love of God, because we are washed clean of everything, and we are these amazing beings that are connected to God in this profound way, and we can just be the love of God. And so I would say just focus on God's compassion and love for us, and then integrate, this is another thing about PTSD that I learned, but be like a little child, play in nature more and have more fun, and just have these really present moments where you're having a good time and you're not even thinking about that, not in a worldly way, but kind of in a childlike way, you know, where you're just there.
So one of the things that worked for me was forgiveness.
Yes.
I walked around with this so heavy on my shoulders, in my mind, and there was a point when I said, you know what, I mean, I can't change it, it's happened. And I didn't personally go up to the person and said, I forgive you, but it was a conscious thought that I now forgive this person, and I'm now going to live my life. Did that work for you at all? Did you?
Yeah, you know, I'm embarrassed to say it took writing the book for me to get to that point, but I realized how deep it was, and I realized how I was carrying it for so long. And forgiveness is definitely for us. You know, it's not necessarily for that person. So that greater level of freedom felt amazing. So yeah, forgiveness and really believing that, you know, from my near-death experience, I know that I have to review the things I've done to other people, the way that I've harmed others. I don't have to review what they've done, and he's going to have to review that and see the pain that it cost my life and feel it, you know, in a deep way. And it's not in a punishing way. It's really just we're all connected in this way, and we get to see how our actions and how our wounded places wound other people, and so that helped. But yeah, initially I was just so angry that I couldn't do anything about it to stop this person from continuing to do this. You know, and I'm sure that there's some of that too. So that it took a while for me to forgive, but yeah, I'm at this place where I'm free, and that freedom is great.
I had some guilt as well, that maybe I should have said something when it happened, and then I start thinking, well, did I encourage it because I didn't say anything the first time, or the second time, or And then I started, well, and then that's when my mind really got messed up because, well, how much of this did I cause on myself? Maybe the first time wasn't my fault, but it happened multiple times. So at what point did it become my fault? You're not always supposed to say something if someone does something to you. I struggled with that. What do you think? I'm curious. What do you?
Well, I think children who are manipulated, you can't blame them. I mean, they're children and they're innocent and they don't know. It's easy for an adult mind to go back and say, I should have screamed, I should have gone to the police, I should have made a big, but you don't think to do that as a child. You know, you're deeply traumatized by it and trying to process it and really kind of lost in that moment. And so I would say to anyone who's looking back and doing that, like, don't use your adult brain to go, I should have done this.
Yeah.
You know, like, you can't because you're a child. You know, you couldn't have known what you know now.
Yeah. So the other thing is, you're never going to forget, right? But when do you know that you've gotten to a point where it does not have the same hold on you like it used to?
Well, I think maybe you'll find this, like talking about it. You know, when you're able to talk about it and you think maybe it'll help someone else, that's when it begins to release from you. It's like it's no longer my story. It's a public story that might help someone else, and it might help them on their journey. And I feel distance from it, and that's a great feeling. So I think that's why I love teaching creative writing, because I certainly allowed students to process some of those things. So sometimes writing can be a way to release it too. If you're not, you know, not everyone wants to get on YouTube and talk about this. So, you know, you can write it and burn it. You can write it and share it with your best friend or loved one. You can share it with your minister, you know, but there are many different ways to just release it to, you know, and that's kind of important. But yeah, when you can talk about it without crying and have that distance, then you know you've come a long way.
Okay. So as we're closing, anything else that you would like to share with anyone who might eventually come across this interview, this video, and be going through, you know, anything else that perhaps we didn't cover?
Yeah, to just love yourself through the process. You know, I think you kind of brought that up with we even blame ourselves sometimes, and just send so much love to yourself as a survivor, and that does give you the strength to start walking through it and find empathetic, caring people. You know, if you don't find them in your family or your friend group, or just keep looking, because they exist. And those empathetic, caring people can be just lifesavers. They can even laugh with you about it later. Like, and that sounds bizarre, but you know, you have these layers to stories with people, and people who know you and empathize with you can help a lot. So I would say love yourself most of all.
Okay. All right, and then if you would share your YouTube information with us.
So I talk about my near-death experience, and it's Tricia Barker Healed by the Light, or Tricia Barker NDE. You can just put that in the search bar and find me. But I interview other people who have gone through spiritually transformative experiences, but I didn't get to talk about this too much on my channel, so I'm so grateful for this interview. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.